My family expected me to cover up what my brother did to his daughter, so I showed the cops the footage instead. My older brother Garrett treated me like his personal babysitter from the moment his girlfriend got pregnant. It didn't matter if I had exams, work commitments, or my own life. Watching his daughter Ivy always came first, and he expected me to just accept that reality without question or complaint. Garrett's entitlement started before Ivy was even born. He showed up at my apartment one evening with this massive binder, the kind you'd use for a major business presentation, not childcare. Inside were detailed spreadsheets with my babysitting shifts already mapped out in color-coded blocks that covered the next 2 years. Tuesday and Thursday nights were mine because those were his gym sessions with his personal trainer. Saturday mornings, so he could sleep off his Friday nights out drinking. Christmas Eve had all-day coverage written in red marker across the entire box. New Year's Eve was blocked out completely with a note saying he had important plans. I actually started laughing when I saw the schedule, thinking this was his twisted idea of a joke or some kind of prank, but his face remained completely serious as he slid the binder across my kitchen table toward me with both hands. "I need to know you're fully committed to this arrangement," he said, like we were negotiating some legally binding contract. The following week, he posted on Facebook about how blessed he was to have such supportive family members. He tagged me in this lengthy post about how I'd already volunteered to help raise Ivy and be an active part of her life from day one. My phone immediately exploded with notifications from relatives commenting about what an amazing uncle I'd be to this baby. Grandma Betty wrote these long paragraphs about the importance of family bonds and helping each other through life's biggest challenges. Cousin Julie shared the post, saying she wished she'd had that kind of family support when her kids were born years ago. Uncle Philip commented about how proud our dad would have been to see us working together like brothers should. When I called Garrett later asking what the hell he was thinking posting that without my actual permission, he said Mom already knew about our arrangement and had approved everything between them. And she actually did know about it. She called me that same night reminding me that family always helps family no matter what, using that specific disappointed tone she'd perfected over 3 decades of parenting. After Ivy was born, things escalated from merely annoying to completely insane within just a few months of her arrival. When Ivy was 8 months old, Garrett showed up at my office right in the middle of a crucial client presentation I'd been preparing for weeks. The receptionist knocked urgently on the conference room door and mouthed the word emergency with genuine panic written across her face. My heart immediately dropped to my stomach, thinking something truly terrible had happened to someone in our family or that there'd been some kind of accident. That emergency turned out to be Garrett standing casually in the lobby with Ivy strapped in her car seat, scrolling mindlessly through his phone like he was just waiting for a coffee order instead of completely disrupting my entire workday. He glanced up when he saw me approaching and said his timing was actually perfect because his barber appointment was scheduled in 15 minutes and he really didn't want to be late for his monthly haircut. Before I could even process what was happening or form any kind of coherent response, he was already out the front door and halfway across the parking lot, leaving me standing there holding a baby. 12 extremely confused clients stared at me through the glass conference room walls while I stood frozen in the lobby. But even that ridiculous incident wasn't the breaking point that finally pushed me over the edge and made me realize how insane this situation had become. My college roommate was getting married at this beautiful vineyard venue, and I was honored to be his best man standing beside him. The location was stunning with string lights wrapped around old oak trees and white roses arranged perfectly along every surface you could see. I was standing right next to the groom in my rented tuxedo, adjusting his tie when I suddenly heard crying coming from the parking lot behind us, making everyone turn around to look at the source of the noise. There was Garrett pushing Ivy's stroller awkwardly across the gravel parking lot in his dress shoes, the wheels catching on rocks with every single step forward. He walked right up to me during the processional music and handed me a folded note that simply said, "Handle this situation because I have a date tonight," then turned around and walked away without another word of explanation. Ivy was absolutely screaming at the top of her lungs, her face bright red and tears streaming down both cheeks in obvious distress and terror. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold in my veins and my stomach turn violently. There were these distinct finger-shaped bruises on her tiny arms that looked exactly like someone had grabbed her way too hard. Small purple marks on her delicate wrists that were unmistakable in their pattern. The spacing was perfect for adult fingers. I spent the entire wedding ceremony locked in the venue bathroom, trying desperately to calm Ivy down while listening to muffled vows happening through the thin door separating us from the ceremony, my best friend getting married without me there. The tile walls amplified every cry and made her screams echo horribly throughout the small space, drowning out what should have been one of the most important moments in my best friend's life. My mom wasn't any better than Garrett when it came to respecting my boundaries or acknowledging I had my own life to live outside of being their unpaid childcare worker. She started showing up at my apartment completely unannounced with Ivy in tow at random times throughout the week without any warning. I'd come home exhausted from work to find her sitting comfortably on my couch with the baby, somehow having obtained my spare key without ever asking for my permission or even telling me she'd made a copy of it. The absolute second she saw me walk through the door, she'd immediately grab her purse and head straight for the exit without asking if I had evening plans or giving me money for the diapers and formula I kept having to buy with my own limited budget from my entry-level job. She'd just leave without a single word, like I was some kind of free daycare service. The worst part about the entire situation was observing how Ivy physically flinched whenever someone moved too quickly anywhere near her small body or raised their voice even slightly. She was consistently hungry every single time I saw her. Her clothes were perpetually dirty with various stains that should have been washed out, and she had diaper rash that never seemed to heal properly. Everything finally exploded into a full-blown crisis when I announced my long-planned trip to visit my girlfriend Sarah overseas in Germany. We'd been maintaining a difficult long-distance relationship for over a year, and I'd painstakingly saved every single dollar for this trip by picking up extra shifts at work and literally skipping meals to afford the expensive international flight that cost nearly $2,000. When I casually mentioned the trip during our monthly family dinner at Mom's house, Garrett's response was immediate and clearly calculated to sabotage me. He pulled out his phone right there at the table and deliberately booked himself a vacation for the exact same dates as mine, without even pretending to check if those dates worked for anyone else first. He actually laughed out loud and said I'd obviously have to reschedule my trip since he'd already put his deposit down first and couldn't get a refund. He turned his phone screen around to show everyone at the table the confirmation email like it was some brilliant strategic chess move he'd just executed perfectly and expected everyone to congratulate him. Mom nodded along in agreement, saying family obligations always come first, and I could see Sarah literally anytime I wanted to since we talked on the phone regularly anyway, and she wasn't going anywhere. They had my entire 2-week schedule already planned out between them, casually discussing my babysitting duties over meatloaf like I wasn't even sitting right there at the same table listening. I felt my hands starting to shake with pure rage as I carefully set down my fork on my plate to avoid throwing it across the room. For the first time in my entire life, I looked both of them directly in their eyes and said absolutely not in the firmest voice I could manage. I clearly stated I was not watching Ivy during their vacation and that I had my own life. The silence that followed my declaration was deafening and uncomfortable for everyone present at the dinner table. I should have recognized from how quickly they both said, "That's perfectly fine," and they'd simply find someone else that they already had something sinister planned in advance. The specific way Mom and Garrett exchanged meaningful glances across the dinner table should have served as my obvious warning. I didn't hear a single word from either of them until the exact morning of my scheduled international flight to Germany. I woke abruptly at 4:52 in the morning to absolutely blood-curdling screams coming from directly outside my apartment door that made me think someone was being violently attacked or murdered right on my doorstep in the hallway. My heart hammered painfully against my ribcage as I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, ready to immediately dial 911 for emergency help from the police. I crept slowly to the door in my pajamas and carefully looked through the peephole to assess the situation outside before opening the door to any potential danger that might be waiting. Ivy was completely alone on my doorstep, wearing only a thin diaper and a short-sleeved shirt despite the freezing temperature outside in the middle of February. The dim porch light illuminated her tear-streaked face and her small lips trembling visibly in the bitter cold that had to be below freezing. Her tiny body was shaking from a combination of fear and dangerous cold exposure. I immediately yanked open the door and discovered a note taped directly to her shirt that simply read, "Thanks for watching," her in Garrett's distinctive handwriting that I recognized instantly. I stood there in complete shock for several seconds, unable to process what I was actually seeing in front of me on my doorstep at this ungodly hour of the morning. I quickly scooped up Ivy and was horrified to feel how ice-cold her skin was against my hands when I touched her. Her lips had an alarming blue tint to them that indicated dangerous cold exposure that could lead to hypothermia. I rushed her inside my apartment and wrapped her shivering body in every warm blanket I could grab from my bedroom closet, while simultaneously dialing my girlfriend Sarah with my other hand because I needed someone to help me think clearly. Sarah knew absolutely everything about the Garrett situation because I'd vented to her countless times during our video calls late at night. When I frantically told her what was currently happening, she didn't even hesitate for a single second before responding. She immediately said she was booking the next available flight to come here and help me deal with this crisis situation. I received her flight confirmation email within just 5 minutes while I was still trying to warm up Ivy and get her to stop crying. That's when I shifted into action mode and got to work documenting absolutely everything for legal purposes. I immediately pulled up my security camera footage on my laptop to review what had actually happened on my doorstep earlier. The footage clearly showed Garrett dropping Ivy off at exactly 4:38 in the morning when it was still completely dark outside. He didn't bother knocking on my door or waiting even a single second to see if anyone was actually home to take her inside. He simply placed her on the cold concrete doorstep like she was a package being delivered and immediately jogged back to his idling car that was running in the parking lot. His face was completely visible in the high-definition footage, leaving absolutely no room for him to deny what he'd done or claim it was someone else or an accident. He had deliberately left his infant daughter outside in just a thin shirt in the middle of February without even confirming if anyone was home to take her inside to safety. My phone's weather app clearly showed it was 31 degrees at that exact time, but then I noticed something in the footage that made everything so much worse than I initially thought. Garrett didn't just drop her off and leave immediately. He actually sat in his car for almost 3 full minutes after placing her on the doorstep, just sitting there watching her cry and scream in the cold without doing anything, like he was making sure she was suffering before he drove away to the airport for his vacation. I called CPS immediately, and they arrived at my apartment within 1 hour of my emergency call about child abandonment. The social worker took one long look at the distinct finger-shaped bruises covering Ivy's arms and watched the damning security footage on my laptop and immediately called for emergency removal without any hesitation whatsoever. They took Ivy away that same morning wrapped in a CPS-issued blanket with their logo on it. Her tiny hand reached out toward me as they carried her to their official vehicle, and I felt my heart breaking despite knowing this was absolutely the right decision for her safety. But then something unexpected happened that I wasn't prepared for at all. The CPS worker asked if I'd be willing to give a formal statement about everything I'd witnessed over the past months. Not just this incident, but everything. I said yes without thinking, and she sat down at my kitchen table with a recording device. I started talking and couldn't stop. I told her about the bruises I'd seen before, about how Ivy flinched around adults, about finding her in dirty diapers for hours, about Garrett showing up high to pick her up multiple times, about the time I found small burns on her hands that Garrett said were from hot water but looked deliberate. Things I'd been telling myself weren't my business suddenly poured out in one long confession. The worker's face got more and more serious as I talked. She asked specific questions about dates and times. She asked if I had any photos, and I realized I did. I'd been documenting things without even realizing it. Photos I'd taken of Ivy that showed the progression of neglect over months. Garrett actually had the audacity to text me when his flight landed at his vacation destination in Mexico, casually asking how she was doing like absolutely nothing unusual had happened overnight. When I simply replied that she was fine without elaborating any further, he sent back a thumbs-up emoji, and that was it. I didn't hear a single word from him for 5 full days. Then I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Ivy's mother, Melissa, the girlfriend who'd left Garrett when Ivy was 3 months old. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said CPS had called her. She said she'd been trying to get custody for months, but Garrett convinced judges she was unstable. She said she had proof he was using. She said she had proof he was dealing. She said she had proof of everything, but nobody would listen to her because Garrett was so good at playing the victim. She asked if I'd testify for her, and I said yes before she even finished asking. Then she said something that changed everything. She told me Garrett had another kid, a son who'd been removed from his custody 2 years ago in another state, a case that got sealed because the child was adopted by the foster family. Garrett had done this before, and nobody in our family knew. Mom didn't know. I didn't know. He'd completely hidden an entire child from us. When Garrett finally returned from his tropical vacation 8 days later, he waited 3 additional days before bothering to show up at my apartment like nothing had happened. He was noticeably tanned from lying on beaches, wearing expensive new clothes that probably cost more than an entire month of quality daycare would have cost if he'd bothered to enroll Ivy anywhere legitimate. He walked in casually and glanced around my living room before asking where Ivy was with mild curiosity, like he'd just misplaced his keys. I looked him directly in his eyes and told him flatly that CPS had her in their custody and wouldn't be returning her. His facial expression went from mildly confused to absolutely furious in just seconds as my words registered. He started screaming at top volume that I had absolutely no right to call CPS on him, that I'd completely ruined his entire life, that family doesn't do this kind of thing to family no matter what happened. His voice actually cracked with genuine emotion on the last word as the reality of potential consequences started sinking in for the first time. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. He said he'd tell everyone I'd been the one hurting Ivy, that I'd made up the abandonment story, that the security footage was edited, that he had witnesses who'd say I'd been obsessed with taking Ivy from him. He pulled out his phone and showed me texts he'd apparently been preparing, fake conversations he'd created between him and friends about being worried about me acting strange around Ivy, about him considering getting a restraining order. He'd been planning this counterattack the entire time he was on vacation. He thought he was 10 steps ahead of me and that I'd panic. Mom showed up at my apartment exactly 20 minutes later, which meant Garrett had called her the second he left my building. She walked in already yelling at full volume about how I'd betrayed the entire family, demanding to know how I could possibly do this to my own brother. Her face was bright red with anger, her usually perfect hair disheveled. I silently walked over to my laptop and turned the screen around to show them both the security footage without saying a single word. But I didn't show them the regular footage. I showed them the extended version where Garrett sat in his car, watching Ivy scream for 3 full minutes before driving away, smiling to himself. Mom went completely quiet as she processed what she was seeing on the screen. Not 10 seconds. Complete silence for almost a full minute. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said we needed to delete the footage before anyone else saw it, that we could say I must have been confused about the timeline, that we could fix this as a family. She actually asked me to destroy evidence of child abandonment to protect Garrett. I couldn't believe the words coming from her mouth. The CPS caseworker had specifically given me her business card and explicitly told me to call immediately if either of them showed up at my residence trying to interfere with the investigation or intimidate me into changing my statement. I discreetly texted her while they were still standing in my living room trying to convince me. She replied immediately saying she'd send someone over right away and instructed me not to let them leave with any of Ivy's belongings that I still had. Garrett tried to physically push past me to grab Ivy's diaper bag sitting by my door. I blocked his path, and he shoved me backward hard with both hands planted on my chest. I fell awkwardly and hit my shoulder painfully against the wooden doorframe. Everything went temporarily fuzzy for a second, with sharp pain shooting down my entire arm. When I could finally focus my vision again, Sarah was suddenly there in my apartment. She'd arrived just in time to witness Garrett violently pushing me to the ground, but she wasn't alone. She'd brought 2 police officers with her from the airport. She'd called them during her layover explaining the situation, and they'd agreed to escort her to my apartment for a welfare check. The timing was absolutely perfect. Garrett's face went white when he saw the uniforms. Mom started talking fast, trying to explain, trying to spin the situation, but the officers had already seen him push me. They'd watched through the window before coming in. They arrested him right there in my living room for assault and violating an emergency protective order I didn't even know had been issued. Turns out when you abandon a child, they automatically issue protection orders. Garrett wasn't supposed to be anywhere near me or anyone connected to the case. He started screaming about his rights while they handcuffed him. Mom tried to physically block the officers from taking him and got arrested too for obstruction. I watched them both get walked out in handcuffs. The next several days were surreal. My phone exploded with messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years. Some were supportive, most were angry. Uncle Philip left a voicemail saying I'd destroyed the family over nothing. Cousin Julie posted on Facebook calling me a liar and saying Garrett would never hurt anyone. But then something unexpected started happening. Other people started coming forward. A neighbor of Garrett's called CPS, saying she'd heard Ivy screaming for hours at night. A cashier at the grocery store near his apartment said she'd seen him yelling at Ivy in the parking lot. His ex-co-worker said Garrett had bragged about getting high while babysitting. Melissa flew in from out of state with boxes of evidence. Text messages where Garrett admitted to using while Ivy was in his care. Photos she'd secretly taken during supervised visits showing injuries. Hospital records from 3 different emergency rooms with suspicious injury patterns. Bank statements proving Garrett spent child support money on himself. The CPS investigation moved incredibly fast once they realized the scope. Rebecca, the caseworker, called me in for a follow-up interview. She brought a detective with her this time. They asked about Garrett's friends, his habits, his schedule. They asked if I'd ever seen him with large amounts of cash or suspicious packages. I told them about the time I'd gone to his apartment and found Ivy alone in her crib while he was passed out on the couch. How I'd found white powder residue on his coffee table. How his pupils were always wrong when he picked her up. How he'd disappear for hours during visits, leaving Ivy with strangers. The detective's expression got darker with every answer. He asked if I'd testify to all of this in court. I said absolutely yes. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. They were opening a criminal investigation into Garrett for child endangerment, possession, and potentially distribution. This wasn't just a custody case anymore. Mom made bail after 2 days. She showed up at my office building despite the protective order, screaming in the lobby that I'd sent my own brother to jail. Security had to physically remove her while she screamed about family loyalty. They violated her bail conditions, and she went right back to jail, this time for 30 days. Garrett stayed locked up. His bail was set at $50,000, and nobody would post it. Not Mom from jail, not other relatives, nobody. He called me collect from county jail, and I actually answered. He was crying, begging me to drop everything. He said he'd go to rehab, he'd be a better father, he'd pay me back for everything. Then his voice changed, got cold. He said if I didn't drop it, he'd make sure I regretted it for the rest of my life. He said he had friends on the outside who knew where I lived. He said accidents happen all the time. I recorded the entire call with my phone, sent it straight to his public defender and the prosecutor. That threat added witness intimidation charges. His bail got revoked entirely. The public defender quit. Garrett had to represent himself at his preliminary hearing because no lawyer would take his case after hearing that recording. The judge was a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd seen everything until she watched the security footage. Her expression changed completely. She leaned forward, studying every second of Garrett sitting in his car watching Ivy scream. When it finished, she asked him directly if he had anything to say for himself. Garrett stood up and tried to explain that he was just stressed, that being a young father was hard, that I'd blown everything out of proportion. The judge cut him off mid-sentence. She said in 30 years on the bench, she'd never seen such clear evidence of deliberate child endangerment. She said the 3 minutes he sat watching Ivy suffer showed consciousness of guilt. She said a stressed parent makes mistakes, but doesn't sit and watch their child freeze. She bound him over for trial on all charges: child abandonment, child endangerment, assault, witness intimidation. His trial date got set for 6 weeks out. Melissa's emergency custody hearing was scheduled first, though. I testified for 2 hours about everything I'd witnessed. The judge granted Melissa full temporary custody that same day. Garrett lost his mind when he heard. He had to be physically restrained by deputies after he tried to jump over the table at Melissa. That added another charge. He was spiraling completely out of control. Meanwhile, I was trying to put my life back together. Sarah had extended her stay indefinitely, working remotely from my apartment. We'd planned this romantic reunion for months, but instead, she was helping me document harassment and prepare for trial. One morning, I woke to find my car keyed with the word traitor scratched into every panel. Security footage showed it was cousin Mike. He got arrested too. The family was imploding. Uncle Philip showed up at my apartment building trying to force his way past the doorman. James, my doorman, was an ex-Marine and didn't budge. Philip threw a punch and got dropped immediately. James held him in a chokehold until police arrived. Assault charges. Another family member behind bars. I started getting weird packages at work again. But this time they weren't just baby clothes. Someone sent me a dead rat. Another package had photos of me with my face crossed out. HR evacuated my entire floor when one package leaked a red fluid that turned out to be paint. FBI got involved because of the mail threats. They traced some packages back to Mom in jail. She'd been coordinating with other family members to harass me, even from behind bars. Witness tampering charges got added to her case. Her 30-day sentence turned into 6 months. She screamed at the judge that I was destroying the family, and the judge added another month for contempt. Garrett's trial started on a Tuesday. The courtroom was packed, half with Garrett's supporters, including family members I barely recognized, half with people I'd never met who'd apparently been victimized by Garrett before. A woman introduced herself as the mother of Garrett's first child, the one who'd been adopted. She testified that Garrett had broken their son's arm when he was 6 months old, that he'd been high during supervised visits, that he'd threatened to kill her when she tried to get custody, that the system had failed once before, and she was terrified they'd fail again. Her son was 5 now, thriving with his adoptive family, but still had nightmares. Melissa testified next with evidence I hadn't seen before. Videos she'd secretly recorded during visits showing Garrett nodding off while Ivy played near the stairs, photos of drug paraphernalia in his apartment, text messages where he admitted to his dealer that he had a kid to feed but needed his fix more, bank records showing thousands spent at casinos. The neighbor testified about hearing Ivy cry for 8 hours straight one night, about calling police twice for welfare checks, about seeing Garrett's friends coming and going at all hours carrying suspicious bags, about finding Ivy alone in the hallway once, wandering in just a diaper while Garrett was passed out inside with the door open. My testimony lasted 3 hours. The prosecutor walked me through everything chronologically. Every incident, every bruise, every red flag I'd ignored or minimized because he was family. She showed the security footage on the courtroom screens, multiple angles, the extended cut showing Garrett watching and waiting, even smiling before he drove away. The defense tried to argue I was jealous of Garrett, that I'd made everything up to take Ivy for myself. But then they played the jail call recording where he threatened me. Even his own supporters in the gallery went quiet. The prosecutor rested after 2 days. Garrett's defense took 10 minutes. He called one character witness who testified Garrett was a good guy who just made mistakes. On cross-examination, that witness admitted he'd met Garrett in rehab and hadn't seen him in 3 years. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes, guilty on all counts, every single one. Garrett's sentencing hearing was a week later. The judge heard from CPS about Ivy's progress in Melissa's care, from the therapist treating Ivy for trauma, from me about the impact on my life, from the mother of Garrett's first son, from a woman who came forward saying Garrett had been arrested for DUI with Ivy in the car months before, but the charges got dropped. The judge sentenced him to 15 years for the endangerment and abandonment charges running consecutive, another 5 for the assault and intimidation charges, 20 years total. He'd be 48 when he got out. His parental rights were permanently terminated for both children. He screamed as they dragged him out that this was all my fault. Mom got out after serving her sentence. She tried contacting me through Aunt Linda, who'd actually been supportive. Linda told her to stop. Mom showed up at my apartment anyway. James called police before she made it to the elevators. She violated her restraining order and went back to jail for another 90 days. When she got out the second time, something had changed. She sent me a letter through her lawyer. It wasn't an apology exactly, but she said she'd been in therapy in jail, that she'd realized she'd enabled Garrett's addiction and abuse for years, that she'd chosen protecting him over protecting grandchildren who needed her. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted me to know she was trying to change, that she'd cut off all contact with Garrett, that she was attending Al-Anon meetings for family members of addicts, that she was selling her house and moving out of state to start over, that she understood if I never wanted to see her again. I didn't respond. Sarah and I got married at the courthouse 6 months after the trial ended. No family, just us, James the doorman, and my boss Janet as witnesses. Simple and perfect. We had dinner at our favorite restaurant and went home. Started planning our actual future instead of just surviving. Melissa sends me photos of Ivy twice a month. She's 4 now, thriving in preschool. No memory of what happened. Melissa got her into therapy young, and the therapist says she's processing trauma well. She'll have scars, but she'll be okay. She knows she has an uncle who helped save her, but we've agreed not to force a relationship. Maybe when she's older and ready, we'll meet. Maybe not. What matters is she's safe. The other cousins who attacked me all faced consequences. Mike paid restitution for my car. Philip did community service for assaulting James. Others got restraining orders. The family fractured into pieces that will probably never reconnect. Aunt Linda stayed in touch. She told me most of the family eventually came around after the trial, that seeing the evidence presented in court made them realize they'd been lied to, that some feel ashamed, they didn't believe me, that others are still in denial. She said Mom cries when she talks about me. I don't know what to do with that information. Part of me wants to reach out. Part of me knows the damage is too deep. Sarah and I had our own daughter last year. We named her something that means light. When I hold her, I think about Ivy and how close we came to losing her permanently. I think about the choice I made that morning when I could have just taken Ivy to the airport and pretended everything was fine. How easy it would have been to go along with it like I had so many times before. But I also think about Garrett's other son, about how the system failed him once, about how a whole family knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to be the one to destroy everything by speaking up. I was that person, the one who broke the family, the one who sent his own brother to prison, the one who got his mother arrested. I carry that weight every single day, but I also carry the knowledge that a little girl is alive and safe because I made that call, that she'll grow up knowing love instead of fear, that she'll never wonder why nobody saved her. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything else you thought mattered. I lost a family, but I helped save a life. Looking back, I'd make the same choice again, every single time.